Tower of Silence, also known as Dakhma, is a type of structure used for funerary purposes by adherents of the Zoroastrian faith. This Zoroastrian practice for the disposal of the dead involves the exposure of the corpse to the sun and vultures. This practice has been used traditionally by Zoroastrians, though it has become less common in recent times. The exposure of dead bodies to scavenging animals have been practiced by the Persians for the thousands of years. It will be reasonable to date the Zoroastrian practice even further back in time than 5th century before Christ. There is a rationale for this treatment of the dead. According to the Zoroastrian belief, the four elements fire, water, earth and air are sacred and ought not to be polluted by the disposal of the dead. Cremation, for example, is believed to cause pollution to fire, air and at times river water as well, whilst burial without adequate lining of the grave causes pollution to the earth and groundwater. In order to avoid polluting these elements, Zoroastrian resorted to the other means of disposing their dead. The most notable of these is the exposure of the dead to scavenging animals. At present, it is not entirely clear as to when the earliest of these structures were built. Nevertheless, the Towers of Silence that are in existence today may have the same or similar construction to the ones used in the past. These towers were essentially raised platforms with 3 concentric circles within them. The bodies of men were arranged in the outer circle, those of women in the middle circle, and those of children in the inner circle. The dead were left on the Tower of Silence, where their flesh will be eaten by vultures. Provided that the vultures are present in adequate numbers, the flesh may be completely stripped from the bones in less than half an hour. After the body was stripped of its flesh, the remaining bones will be left to be dried and bleached by the sun. The stripping of the flesh and the drying of the bones are regarded as a purification process, after which the skeletal remains may be collected and deposited in an ossuary, which may be located within or nearby the tower. Alternatively, the bones may be placed in the central well, where if the climate is dry they will naturally disintegrate into powder. Towers of Silence can be found in Iran and India, where Parsi communities exist. In Iran, Towers of Silence were in use until this funerary practice was banned by the government during the 1970s. In a report from 2015, it was written that India has a Parsi population of around 61,000. Of these, 45,000 live in Mumbai. Therefore, it's in this city that several Towers of Silence may be found. Nowadays, Zoroastrians of India faced the problem of depopulation of votaries. As a result, there were not enough votaries for the disposal of the dead. While some in the Paris community have decided to adopt other forms of funerary practice, such as burial or cremation. Others are taking steps to maintain the tradition, for instance by constructing aviaries, where votaries could live and breed near the Towers of Silence. The tower complex contains a small building called a sagri, within which a fire is kept burning continuously. In the present time, Zoroastrian temples close to the Towers of Silence and Yazd are in ruined condition and are not in use anymore. Persepolis, founded by Darius I in 518 before Christ, was the capital of Achaemenid Empire. It was built on an immense half-artificial, half-natural terrace, where the King of Kings created an impressive palace complex inspired by Mesopotamian models. The city's immense terrace was begun about 518 before Christ by Darius the Great, the Achaemenid Empire's king. On this terrace, successive kings erected a series of architecturally stunning palatial buildings, among them the massive Apadana Palace and the Throne Hall. The structures were built by Darius I the Great and his successors, Xerxes and Artaxerxes, and maintained until 330 before Christ, when they were looted and burned by the Alexander of Macedon. Many archaeologists maintain that it was built as the site for celebrating Nowruz, the Persian New Year festival. Others deny that there is any evidence for celebrating Nowruz in the Achaemenid period at Persepolis. Some have seen Persepolis as illustration of royal power or a political, economic and administrative center of the empire, or an observatory for correcting time reckoning systems. Some have seen Persepolis as illustration of royal power or political, economic and administrative center of the empire, or an observatory for correcting time reckoning systems. But Darius himself specifies that he was building a stronghold, not a political center, and the case for considering Persepolis as the site of the Nowruz festival can't be taken lightly. The largest and the most imposing palace of Persepolis was the audience palace, usually called the Apadana. It had a height of nearly 22 meters and stood on the podium 3 meters high, then the level of the spacious open court expanding to its north and east. It consisted of a main square hall with 36 columns, 3 porticos on the north, west and east sides, 4 corner towers and a series of storage and guard rooms on the south. The most splendid parts of Persepolis are the double reverse stairways of the Apadana. The sculptured representation of the eastern facade depicts the rows of lance-bearers, which wearing earrings, armlets and the Persian costume and the mitra. The garments of similarly clad Susan guards, depiction of the immortals, the elite of Achaemenid army. The oldest palace of Persepolis is the charming structure known as the Tachara, built by Darius, south of the Apadana, and on the platform 3 meters higher than the level of the later. This palace served as the model for the facade shown of the tomb of the Darius the Great at Naqsh-e Rustam, and copied of those of his successors. The There are 6 finished Achaemenid royal tombs. 4 of them have been discovered at Naqsh-e Rustam and 2 at Persepolis. The 4 at Naqsh-e Rustam belongs to Darius I the Great and probably Xerxes, Artaxerxes I Macrochair, and Darius II Nothus. The Persepolis tombs, which appear to be younger, must belong to the next 2 kings, Artaxerxes II Mnemon and Artaxerxes III Ophus. Naqsh-e Rustam is situated about 5 kilometers northwest of Persepolis. As is shown by a pre-Achaemenid relief and several old graves, Naqsh-e Rustam was already a place of some importance when King Darius I the Great ordered his monumental tomb to be carved into the cliff. Royal rock tombs can't be identified with any certainty, but they must obviously have belonged to Darius' sons and his successor Xerxes, his son Artaxerxes I and his grandson Darius II. Each tomb could contain 3 to 9 people.